It was an ordinary afternoon in a high-end supermarket in the city, frequented mainly by people from the elite. The well-organized shelves and impeccably clean floors demonstrated the level of luxury of that place. Karina, a woman in her early 30s, walked the halls with the usual haste of someone who believed she was above everyone else there. She was a maid in the mansion of the Albuquerques, one of the richest and most influential families in the city. Although she was an employee, her arrogance seemed to know no bounds. Karina maintained an air of superiority that served as a shield against anyone she judged to be inferior. For her, her job at the mansion was a sign of status, something that gave her the right to think she was special. At the cashier, there was a small line. Karina snorted impatiently as she waited, watching people with disdain. His irritation intensified when he noticed a black boy, about 10 years old, in front of him. He held a few basic items: bread, milk, and a small packet of biscuits. The boy, named David, wore simple, clean clothes with a shy and gentle look. He looked nervous, rummaging through his pants pockets as if looking for something. "Let's go, boy." Karina shot her voice full of impatience and contempt. "People like you shouldn't even be here if you can't afford things. Why don't you go shopping at a roadside market?" The sentence came out loaded with poison, without any remorse. David looked up, surprised and hurt by those words. He finally found a crumpled bill and some coins, timidly placing them on the counter. His voice came out softly. "I'm sorry, lady. I'm going to pay. I was just checking if I had enough." The cashier looked at Karina disapprovingly, but she ignored it. Instead, she rolled her eyes and sighed dramatically. "Of course, as if you were really going to pay for everything. Children like you only know how to give work and cause problems." The boy said nothing, paid for his groceries and left in a hurry, visibly shaken. Karina watched as he walked away, believing she had done something right by putting the boy in his place. What Karina didn't know is that the supermarket had cameras that captured the entire scene. In addition, one of the customers who watched it was deeply bothered and decided to report what happened to the management of the establishment. However, the real blow would come later, when she discovered the identity of the boy she despised so much. The discovery that would change her life and put her in front of a moral dilemma that would test her character like never before. Karina returned to the Albuquerque mansion that same afternoon, feeling exhausted and irritable. The image of the black boy in line at the supermarket had already dissipated from his mind, as if none of it mattered. She walked through the back door as usual, removing her shoes before getting ready for another day of work in the huge marble and glass house. While washing the dishes from the night before, he heard the sound of a car arriving at the main entrance. He immediately recognized the noise of the luxurious engine of his boss, Fernando Albuquerque. He had spent the day away, taking care of important meetings, as he always did. However, what Karina did not expect was that, with him, the same boy she had humiliated hours before in the supermarket would enter. She was paralyzed, her body stiff as stone, as she listened to the child's soft footsteps and the boss's firm footsteps echoing down the main hallway. "Dad, today was a hard day, but I'm fine." David's voice sounded soft and controlled, trying to sound strong to his father. Karina could barely breathe. "Daddy?" That could only be a mistake. His thoughts scrambled as he tried to comprehend what was happening. Then, with her heart racing, she realized the devastating truth. The boy she humiliated was the son of her boss, billionaire Fernando Albuquerque. While she remained motionless in the kitchen, Fernando and Davi passed through the living room on their way to the office. Karina tried to pretend to be busy, but her hands were shaking so much that she dropped a glass into the sink, breaking into pieces. A short time later, Fernando appeared in the kitchen with a serious expression. His eyes were heavy and cold as, "Deal, Karina, can we talk?" His voice was low but loaded with authority. She felt the ground collapse beneath her feet as she nodded her head affirmatively. She followed him into the living room, where he sat in a leather armchair, letting the silence hang in the air like a threat. "I received a worrying call from the supermarket you frequent. he began, pausing to assess his reaction. It seems that someone witnessed a regrettable scene involving you and my son, David. And of course, the cameras at the market also confirmed what happened. He took a deep breath, frustration evident on his face. I want to hear your version. Karina shifted in her chair. His mouth opened and closed a few times without making a sound. Then finally, he murmured, I didn't know he was your son, Lord. I thought it was just one. His words disintegrated under the weight of his own prejudice. A black boy? Fernando completed with a cutting tone. And you thought that gave you the right to humiliate him? To demote it? Does the fact that you work here give you any kind of power over other people? Karina felt the tears gather in her eyes, not because he regretted what he had done, but because he knew it could cost him his job. His excuses were empty, driven more by fear than genuine repentance. Sir, please, he begged. It was a mistake. I can change. Fernando looked at her with the coldness of someone who was not willing to accept easy excuses. I'll think about what to do about it, Karina. But know that what you did was inadmissible. Not only because David is my son, but because no one deserves to be treated this way. He stood up and, before leaving, gave her one last look. I hope you reflect on what happened because it won't go unnoticed. As he walked away, Karina collapsed. In her chair, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She had never felt so small, so crushed by her own actions. And for the first time, a spark of genuine regret began to burn within her. But would that be enough to change what happens next? At this point in the story, we will delve into the three main characters: Karina, maid; Fernando, boss; and Davi, boy. We will also introduce the arcs of transformation that will define your emotional journeys. Karina is a bitter and resentful woman. Despite having a relatively stable job in the Albuquerque household, she always felt inferior. Living with the luxury of others has caused her to develop a defensive arrogance, projecting her own sense of failure onto those she considers below her. She wants to be respected, but she uses contempt and humiliation as mechanisms to try to feel superior. His prejudiced attitude is not only a matter of racism, but also of his own inferiority complex. The boy's humiliation in the supermarket was the height of her arrogance, and the impact of discovering that he is her boss's son leaves her devastated. It is at this moment that she begins to question her own humanity. At first, his regret is driven by the fear of losing his job, but over the course of the story, she will be forced to confront her true nature and reflect on her actions. Fernando. Albuquerque is a powerful and successful man. At the age of 48, he built a business empire through hard work and intelligence. Unlike other billionaires, he values people's character above their social status. His fortune has not blinded him to the injustices of the world, especially when it comes to his son. He wants to raise his son, David, to be someone good, upright and empathetic, regardless of the wealth that surrounds them. The idea of someone trying to belittle your child because of the color of their skin or their origin is something they simply cannot accept. Initially, Fernando wishes to punish Karina in an exemplary manner, but as the story progresses, he will be faced with the choice of simply firing the maid or giving her a genuine chance at change. This conflict between justice and forgiveness will be crucial to the development of the plot. Davy is a 10-year-old boy, kind, intelligent, and curious. Despite his privileged condition, he is raised to understand that not everyone has the same opportunities. His father teaches him to be humble and to treat everyone with respect. Davy does not want anyone to be punished for him, but he also does not accept being treated unfairly. His greatest wish is for people to see him for who he is, and not for his color or his family's money. The traumatic experience in the supermarket marks Davi deeply. However, his response is marked by a wisdom that few adults would have. He wants Karina to understand the mistake, but he does not want her destruction. This noble behavior will surprise everyone and will be the engine for the true climax of the story. Few days after the incident, Fernando summons Karina for a definitive conversation. But instead of being alone, he is accompanied by David. The boy looks at Karina with a mixture of pain and compassion. "Karina, my father told me what happened." "In the supermarket," says Davy, his voice fragile but firm. "I just want to understand why you did that." Karina feels the weight of the question. The boy's words directly affect her pride and make her realize the cruelty of her actions. For the first time, she sees David not as an ordinary child, but as a human being who has been unfairly attacked for his prejudice. I made a mistake, boy." His voice comes out broken. "I was unfair. I was cruel. I have no excuses for what I did." Fernando watches her, his eyes evaluating each word sternly. But David interrupts before his father can speak. "I don't want you to be fired, Karina. I want you to learn not to do this to anyone else. I want you to understand how it hurt me and how it hurts other people." David looks at his father with determination. "That's what I want." Fernando is surprised by his son's maturity, but also by the challenge that this choice imposes. He has the option to simply fire Karina, but something in Davy's voice makes him reconsider. Perhaps teaching a lesson is more powerful than meting out a punishment. Days have passed since the revelation in the supermarket. With each new dawn, Karina worked in the Albuquerque mansion with a crushing weight on her shoulders. His behavior changed dramatically. The usual arrogance was replaced by a guilty, almost submissive stillness. She knew she was on a very thin wire, and worst of all, she didn't know when it was going to break. One afternoon, Fernando called her for a definitive conversation. Sitting in his luxurious office, he watched her with cold, analytical eyes. Next to him was David, the boy who had decided to give her a chance even after he had been humiliated by her. "Karina, I thought a lot about what happened," Fernando began, his voice calm, but it had the weight of someone who was about to give a verdict. "Most people, in your position, would be immediately fired. But out of respect for my son's request, I've decided you'll have a choice." Karina held her breath, her gaze fixed on the man who could decide her fate in the blink of an eye. "You can leave now, without any reference, and I never want to hear from you again," said Fernando, his eyes serious as a sharp blade. "Or you can accept something that I have never offered to anyone." She frowned, not understanding. Fernando continued, "I'll give you the opportunity to change, but not only here inside the mansion. I want you to spend some time volunteering at an institution that I help fund. It is an NGO that offers support to marginalized children and adolescents, many of them going through difficulties far worse than you could imagine." Karina's shock was visible. Voluntary work? Marginalized children? That seemed like a punishment worse than losing your job. "What's in it for me?" she asked almost without thinking, her voice charged with resentment. Fernando arched his eyebrows, surprised by the boldness of the question. "If you're hoping to gain anything other than learning and humility, then choose the first option and walk away," he said, his patience running out. "But if you accept, I will allow you to continue working here, under surveillance, and most importantly, I hope you learn to treat people with respect and dignity." "What if I don't want to do that?" Karina took a chance, knowing she was challenging his kindness. "So our conversation ends here," Fernando declared without hesitation, "and you'll be fired right now." Faced with the pressure of that choice, Karina realized that she did not have many options. Working in the Albuquerque household was his biggest source of income, and losing that job would spell disaster. Even so, something inside her was also injured, a feeling she couldn't name, but that burned like a thorn in her conscience. "I do," she said, almost not believing her words. "I'm going to do volunteer work." Fernando nodded but did not smile. He didn't seem satisfied, just relieved to have given someone who clearly didn't deserve it a chance. "Good. Tomorrow you will start, and I want detailed reports on what you've learned and how it's changing the way you see the world." He paused, and looked directly into her eyes. And remember, Karina, this is not a punishment. It is an opportunity. Something that few people would have the courage to offer after what you did. She just nodded, still digesting what it meant. The next morning, Karina arrived at the NGO for her first day of volunteer work. She was greeted by a friendly woman named Luisa, who guided her around the place. The community center was small but well-maintained. The children ran everywhere. Some drew on improvised tables. Others played with donated toys. "You're going to work with the younger group," Luisa said, pointing to a room full of children who looked curiously at the newcomer. Karina approached awkwardly with a cautious look. It was then that a little boy of about 5 years old approached holding a broken cart. "Lady, can you help me fix this?" he asked with an innocent smile. Karina was speechless. The simplicity of the request and the kindness of the child struck something deep in her. She bent down, picked up the stroller, and without realizing it, smiled. "Sure, I'll try," she replied, almost surprised at her own kindness. As the days passed, Karina discovered stories of pain, resilience, and hope that she had never imagined. She came to admire those children, and little by little, her hardened heart began to soften. For the first time in her life, she found herself doing something that didn't involve getting anything in return. The volunteer work imposed by Fernando Albuquerque as a condition to keep her job ended up becoming a transformative experience for Karina. In the early days, she still carried resentment. He came grudgingly, performed tasks half-heartedly, and looked at children as if they were a burden. But something began to change. One rainy afternoon, while helping to organize donated toys, Karina was approached by a girl named Larissa. The little girl was about 6 years old, with huge, curious eyes that hid a deep pain. "Girl, do you know how to draw?" Larissa asked, holding a crumpled sheet of paper and a broken pencil. "Not very well," Karina replied, surprised by the simplicity of the question. "It doesn't have to be perfect," Larissa said, smiling. "It just needs to be done with care." That phrase echoed in Karina's mind for hours. For the first time, she realized that her own life had always been based on appearances, status, and bitterness. The way he treated people was a reflection of his own dissatisfaction. In that NGO, where social status meant nothing, what mattered was only what you did for the other. A few days later, Fernando took Davi to see the volunteer work that Karina was doing. I wanted to know if it was having any positive effect. When the boy entered the NGO, his face lit up when he saw Karina organizing the toys and talking to the children in a genuine way. "Hello, Karina," Davi said shyly. She turned to him, a sincere smile rising on her lips, something that hasn't happened for a long time. "Hi, David." His voice came out soft, charged with a new respect that didn't exist before. "You look different," the boy said with the honesty typical of children. "I'm trying to be different," Karina admitted. "I think I needed to learn some lessons that these children are teaching me every day." Davi smiled and walked to a circle of children playing in the next room. Fernando watched everything from afar, intrigued by the change in the maid who was previously arrogant and cruel. After a few weeks of volunteer work, Karina was called to a meeting at the Albuquerque mansion. She expected to be fired, even after the effort she had been making to change. His anxiety was evident. Fernando and Davi were present in the room, and the atmosphere seemed to be charged with tension. "Karina, I watched your progress," Fernando began, his voice firm but not cruel. "And I admit I'm surprised. I truly believed that you would give up or fail in this mission." "I thought that at first, sir, too," Karina admitted sincerely. "But now I understand why you gave me this opportunity. I don't know if I'm totally redeemed, but I'm trying." "We realize you've changed," David interjected, smiling slightly. "And I think everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're willing to really change." Fernando crossed his arms and looked at her with intensity. "Do you understand now what I meant about treating people with respect and dignity?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Karina replied, her eyes filling with tears that she didn't want to let fall. "And I don't want to go back to being that person I was before. I learned that someone's worth is not in appearance, skin color, or social position. It is in character, kindness, and empathy. And as much as I can never fix what I did to David, I'm willing to keep trying to be better." Fernando took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. His eyes met Karina's, evaluating every word said. "I believe we all have the potential to change, Karina," he said finally. "And I'll give you that chance. You will continue to work here. But beyond that, I want you to continue your volunteer work at the NGO, not as an obligation but as an essential part of who you are becoming." Karina nodded vigorously, unable to hold back her tears this time. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, David. You have no idea how much this means to me." What started as an imposition was now a personal mission. Karina started working at the NGO every day off, and her dedication was genuine. The arrogance had disappeared, replaced by a true humility that had come from understanding the reality of the people he had previously despised. But most of all, she had learned something that completely changed her worldview. Respect is not given for wealth or power. It is earned through compassion, humility, and the courage to change. Karina's transformation was no longer just a promise. It was an ongoing process. Weeks passed, and she had become a constant presence at the NGO, now more dedicated than ever. But for this story to have a powerful climax, we need a situation that shows the real impact of Karina's change. Fernando Albuquerque decided to organize a charity event at the mansion to raise funds for the NGO. He wanted his billionaire and powerful friends to see the importance of that work. And to everyone's surprise, Karina was chosen to help organize the event and talk about her volunteer work. The pressure was immense. Karina knew that this event was her true test. She would have to expose herself in front of people she had previously considered superior, but who now understood that they were just people, just like anyone else. On the night of the event, the mansion was packed with important guests. Businessmen, politicians, celebrities, all ready for the night of luxury and generosity that Fernando had prepared. Karina walked nervously through the corridors, adjusting the last details. But the decisive moment came when Fernando announced that she would give a speech to present the NGO's work. The microphone in his hand trembled visibly, but she took a deep breath, looked at David in the audience, the boy she had once humiliated, and who against all odds had held out a chance at redemption, and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone." His voice came out shaky, but it didn't fail. "My name is Karina, and I've been working for Mr. Fernando for a few years. However, what I want to talk about today is something much more important than my work at his house. I want to talk about my transformation." The silence in the room was absolute. All eyes were on her. "Some time ago, I made a terrible mistake. I judged and treated a person with cruelty and prejudice, without even knowing him. I did this because I carried a bitterness that I myself did not understand." Karina took a deep breath, her hands now steady. "And this person, instead of hating me, offered me a second chance. It taught me that someone's true worth is not in the money they have or the appearance they display, but in their ability to care about others." Fernando looked at Karina with discreet pride. David, in turn, smiled widely, as if he had already foreseen that moment. "Working at the NGO taught me what empathy, respect, and humanity are. And I'm not saying this because I want to win your approval. I'm saying this because I've finally come to understand that true respect comes from within, of how we treat others, regardless of who they are." The audience listened attentively, many visibly moved. "Today, I ask you to help these children, not because it is a noble gesture, but because it is the right thing to do. I hope that just as I had the opportunity to change, other people can have it too." "Thanks." The applause was immediate, but not forced. There was genuine emotion in the audience's response. People who had never seen Karina before were giving a standing ovation, discreet tears streaming down their faces. After the event, many guests approached Karina, congratulating her on her courage and sincerity. But the most important moment was when David approached her. "I knew you could change," the boy said, smiling. "That's why I asked my father to give you a chance." Karina bent down and looked directly into David's eyes, her face marked by sincerity. And I'll never be able to thank you enough for that, David. You showed me that forgiveness and empathy are more powerful than anything. Fernando also approached, putting his hand on Karina's shoulder. You did an excellent job today, he said. More than that, you showed that it is possible to change when you really want to do the right thing. Karina just smiled, unable to hold back her tears. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly good about herself. The scene ends with Karina continuing her work at the mansion, but now with a renewed purpose. In addition, she dedicates much of her free time to helping in the NGO, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to make a difference. This story isn't just about forgiveness and empathy. It's about the human ability to recognize your own mistakes and decide to change. A powerful message that touches people because it reflects an essential aspect of the human condition: the constant search for redemption and personal evolution. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions and words have a much greater impact than we realize. Karina learned the hard way that prejudice and arrogance only lead to a path of pain and isolation. His redemption came not from Fernando's wealth or David's immediate forgiveness, but from his own decision to change, to acknowledge his mistakes, and to seek to become a better person. Deep down, we all make mistakes. We all have moments when we fail others, whether through ignorance, prejudice, or pride. But what defines our character is not the mistake itself, but our ability to recognize, learn, and transform. David showed us that true power is in kindness, forgiveness, and compassion. By choosing to forgive Karina and offer her a chance at redemption, he not only changed her life, but also demonstrated a maturity and a pure heart that we should all cultivate. Fernando, in turn, reminds us that offering a genuine opportunity for change to someone who has made a mistake is an act of courage and greatness, because giving a second chance requires more strength than simply rejecting and punishing. If this story has touched your heart, remember that empathy and compassion are choices we can make every day. May we treat others with respect and kindness, regardless of who they are or where they come from. And may we offer a helping hand to those who regret their mistakes and wish to be better. If you liked this story and believe that we need more compassion and empathy in the world, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This way, you help us spread more inspiring messages like this. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that message. Together, we can create a better world, one story at a time.